Good morning. My name is Barbara Fuller, and as Chair of the Board, I welcome you to this June 18th, 2024 working session of the Washtenaw County Board of Road Commissioners. Our office coordinator, Aaron Smith, will describe how our meetings operate, how to access the agenda packet, and how people may participate remotely. Aaron.
Thanks, Chair Fuller. There are multiple ways to make public comment during today's working session, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. If you're here in person and would like to make public comment, please fill out the sign-in sheet now. If you're joining us virtually, we will ask you to raise your hand at the appropriate time in the agenda. If you're joining us virtually and are experiencing technical issues with audio or video during the meeting, submit a comment in the chat feature and our communications manager will help you troubleshoot. If you would like closed captioning during the meeting, you will have to manually change your settings. Click on the captions button and select show captions. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted to wcroads.org in the next few days. There are printed copies of today's meeting agenda on the table near the front door, and it is also posted on our website. And now I'll turn it back over to Chair Fuller.
Thank you, Aaron. I now call this June 18th, 2024 working session to order and ask Aaron to call the roll.
Chair Barb Fuller.
Present.
Vice Chair Rod Green.
Present.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas and Commissioner Jeff Smers have an excused absence. Commissioner Joanne McCullum.
Present.
And then the following directors are in attendance. Managing Director Matt Washtenaw, our Director of Engineering and County Highway Engineer Brent Schlack, Director of Operations Adam Leip, and Director of Finance Dan Ackerman.
Thank you. At this time, we will move on to public participation. This is a time set aside on the agenda to receive comments from the public. This is not intended to be a period for dialogue. Each person will be allotted 3 minutes to address the board, and Aaron will explain how to be recognized to offer comment.
Since this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and virtual attendees, we will take turns between those attending in person and virtually. For our virtual attendees, we have provided some instructions on the screen on how to participate and make public comment. If you're attending this meeting virtually and would like to make comment, please raise your hand now. If you dialed into the meeting from your phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. Our communications manager will unmute virtual participants with raised hands one at a time and will announce your username or the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. And please share your name and address before beginning your comments. And then for our in-person attendees, we will start with those who have signed up on the sign-in sheet as you walked in. If you didn't sign in, you're still welcome to make comment. Our communications manager will notify you when it is your turn.
Very good. Are there any hands raised or any people who have signed in to comment?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, we will move on to our agenda, and I will turn this over to the managing director for today's agenda.
Well, thank you, Chair. Looking forward to the conversation we're about to have regarding road funding, complicated subject, also project selection. So Brent Schlack and Aaron Burkholz from our Director of Engineering, Assistant Director of Engineering are here to present the subject, but I encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. This is going to be a dialogue, but they've got a great slideshow and presentation for the subject matter. Again, it's a subject that's oftentimes complicated, but we get a lot of questions about this. So I'm excited to kind of have this working session with the board, and for others, obviously we're recording this so we can point to this when residents want to delve deep into the subject if they choose. So with that, I'll turn it over to these two gentlemen.
Sure. Brent Schlack, Director of Engineering.
And Aaron Burkholz, Assistant Director of Engineering.
So like Matt said, I appreciate the conversation, and this is an open dialogue. As I was putting this, and I'll apologize, as I was putting this together, I think I gave the presentation a couple different times as I was practicing. So we'll see what version I give today.
It's the 90-minute version.
Yeah, right, maybe, yeah. So Aaron and I will kind of go through it, but I'm sure Matt and even Dan may jump in as we talk about funding or project selection. We all have lived this, and so they may have some comments as we go through. So again, it's Aaron and I giving the presentation. The topics that we're going to cover are our funding sources and our project selection. So the picture that we put on here kind of really represents what we're looking at, where we're pulling a lot of different funding sources, a lot of different areas into our budget. So it also can be looked at as a chicken or the egg, because there are cases where we receive the funding and then we determine what that funding will then improve. Or there's times whenever we know what the improvement will be, and then we're out trying to find those funding sources for that. So in this case, for this presentation, we're going to march through the funding sources and then the project selection. But in most cases, a lot of cases, we do know what that improvement is, and then we're searching for funding. So now we'll get,
Let me
Yeah.
stop you. So we have some shovel-ready projects and we're searching for funding.
so there are, so a lot of times and we'll get into a little bit more detail, but we look at a lot of preventative maintenance type projects. So we're always out there like scoping our roadway. We do Paiser ratings, which gets into our asset management. And so we kind of know what a lot of those improvements are. And so then we're waiting for that funding to come available. Or we have our monitoring list for our traffic signals and for our intersections. We may put a traffic signal, or we may look at a roundabout or some other type of improvement for the intersection. So we're constantly monitoring our roadway system. And so a lot of times, based on our experience, and I think Aaron brought it up. If you look at just the experience in here, we have like over 100 years of experience. And so based on our knowledge and intimate knowledge of our Washtenaw County, a lot of times we know what those improvements are ahead of time.
Did you have something you wanted to add, Matt?
Yeah, I would just say a lot of our asset management practices, doing the culvert inspections, bridge inspections, monitoring intersections, we're seeing needs, and our funding's always going to fall short of the needs. And even in our transportation asset management plan, which we'll get into towards the end, it's got a list of unfunded projects that we know that are out there that we're always, again, looking for pots of money to match up with the needs of Washtenaw County. So I like the chicken or the egg comparison. That is one, what comes first, the identified need or the funding? Oftentimes it's the identified need. So with that.
And in regards to roads, Brent mentioned the term preventative maintenance. Oftentimes in engineering, when we talk about preventative maintenance roadway project, we're talking about asphalt resurfacing project. We just use that as a general term, and we do several road preventative maintenance projects each year. Some of those are funded with federal aid. We'll talk about federal aid, and some of those are funded through the millage. And then some of those are funded with Michigan transportation funds that comes out of the road commission budget. So again, just wanted to touch on what we call preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Commissioner Green.
This might be jumping the gun, but sometimes when I cross from Wayne County and Washtenaw, particularly on Getty's Road, it goes from concrete to asphalt. When do we ever decide to use concrete? Ever?
Yeah, and generally in Washtenaw County during my career here, we have been more inclined to use asphalt.
Right.
Where we use concrete is where we're gonna see like heavy truck turning movements. So for instance, we worked on a segment of Wagner Road off of Jackson. So Wagner between Liberty and Jackson, the Cadillac asphalt plant's right there. So you've got a constant movement of heavy trucks over that segment. And so in that particular case, we built a concrete pavement there. Oftentimes at intersections, we'll look at a rigid pavement, a concrete pavement. More often than not, we use asphalt here, and I've seen a lot of concrete work in Wayne County. It's almost like that's historical, where different counties went different directions. We're fortunate here that we have two asphalt plants that are local. We have the asphalt plant on Rawsonville, we have the asphalt plant on Wagner, and even some of the other plants aren't too far away. Like there's an asphalt plant up in Kensington. So again, we've got ready availability of asphalt to do our pavement improvements.
Thank you.
Is there a cost differential?
There is, and generally, yeah, Barb, generally, we've seen the upfront cost of concrete is higher than asphalt. That's shrinking because of the cost of asphalt escalating as much as it has. the difference is not as great as it used to be. There's still a difference there, but again, what we have to weigh is the short-term cost difference versus maybe a long-term performance. And certainly we consider those when we're scoping a project out.
Yeah, another,
last- I'm
go
sorry.
go ahead. I was just gonna say, another couple examples where we've made those choices are like the roundabout that we built down on Liberty and Zeeb. We made that concrete. Well, we have a lot of trucks turning from the gravel pits. Again, we have a haul route that uses Ann Arbor Saline. And the intersection that we improved at Ann Arbor Saline and Wagner is concrete. Again, because of the turning movements of those trucks.
Which one lasts longer?
In my experience, concrete lasts long. Yeah, it's a rigid pavement. So much of an asphalt pavement section relies on what's underneath it. Because asphalt is a flexible pavement.
Right.
So in some respects, the performance of that asphalt is only as good as what's underneath it. Concrete is rigid, so it can bridge, if there were some flaws underneath, like in the base material, concrete can bridge that somewhat, so.
It's a complicated question. I would also say that concrete, there are a lot of variables that you have to do right. And if not done right, you won't get that long-term success. Even phases of Jackson Road out near Zeeb, we're having to go back and reconstruct portions of Jackson Phase 2, and we still haven't had to reconstruct Phase 1. So there's some variability in some of that. But why we choose certain corridors, just to emphasize commercial corridors like Carpenter Road, Jackson Road, Wagner have been commercial corridors where we see high volumes of truck traffic. That's where we're going to look at, does it make sense long-term for a concrete pavement versus asphalt? We do have concrete plants in the area, but definitely from a cost and economic standpoint, I think asphalt is the winner for our county by and large. But Wayne County, as they had mentioned, have historically been concrete.
Joanne, Commissioner McCollum, sorry.
Yes, so with more EVs on the road and they're heavier, do you see the material for the roads changing in the future?
I'm sorry, I was struggling to hear the question.
Sorry, so with more EVs on the road,
Oh,
do you
okay.
think that the material, will go from asphalt to concrete or something stronger because EVs are heavier?
I don't. I mean, we'll take that into consideration as we're looking at our pavement design. There's a formula, they call it the easels, and it's based on the axles and the number of axles that are spanning and what the weight of those and the number of trucks. And so that's just based on that pavement design and how thick we make that pavement. So I certainly, as those EVs come on, especially, I know that Amazon has a lot of those electric vehicles, and those are probably very heavy. And that will just take into consideration with our pavement design.
Sure. Thank you.
So now I'll get into the funding sources. And there's three major funding sources that we utilize here at the Road Commission. Those are our Michigan Transportation Funds, our millage funds, and our federal aid or state aid that we receive. There's also other funding that we get injected in within our budget. Those sometimes are developer funds. If there's a development coming in, we may see that they require some improvement. So those will get also put within our budget. We have some haul routes that may require, I know that this board has passed the most recent haul route, and those may include improvements to some of our roads. Also, we had a grant program through the Washtenaw County Water Resources that for some culverts. Again, those were shared with the townships, but again, those are additional funds that funnel through our budget. So now just touching on MTF. So the photo, what you see on the screen, the slide, this is a breakdown of the MTF, whether that's the gas tax, registration fees. We receive funding through redirected income tax. There's some for the marijuana tax. So these are just kind of a breakdown of what is included with MTF. So then this funding also then gets distributed through a formula. It's called the Act 51 formula. And then a portion of that, 39% goes to MDOT, 39% comes to the road, through all the county road commissions, and then 22%, about 22% go to the cities. And then those are based on your population, your number of miles, whether those are primary, local, and that formula, I'm sure Dan and Matt could probably describe a little more detail on what that actual is involved within that formula, but that's how those MTF dollars come into our road commission.
Commissioner McCollum.
Yeah, could you just give me a short summary of what, or an idea of fund is redirected income tax of the Michigan Transportation?
Yeah, Dan may have to answer that. I
Right, I know I can get to it.
Dan Ackerman, Director of Finance. What is your question?
Yeah, so the Michigan Transportation Fund is redirected income tax.
Yeah,
I can take a stab at that. Ultimately, when they set the budget each year,
Mhm.
they're going to put more money in the formula. Oftentimes, they'll take those funds, and a lot of times they're coming from the income that the state receives through the income tax credits. So this, through we are guaranteed through taxes paid at the pump, taxes paid at registration fees, marijuana tax, those are guaranteed coming through the formula. What's not guaranteed is year to year, the legislators will set a budget and decide on how much they're going to put through the formula
Out of the general. fund.
out of the general fund. The general fund is comprised of income tax and sales tax often. So that's where that money comes from, but that is not a guarantee to go through the formula. But this is the money that we track very closely on a monthly basis. Dan will put into the board packet the Michigan Transportation Fund spreadsheet, where ultimately we're tracking against our budget, which is currently 36 million. And we're trending a little higher, which is great. And this is one of our primary revenue sources for the road commission.
and so that 17%, I believe, fluctuates year to year. And sometimes you hear there's a surplus with the state's budget, and then the state kind of decides what to do with that. And I imagine some of that impacts us, you know, kind of there's all these competing interests in Lansing as far as, you know, if there is a surplus, who gets what. So that definitely would fluctuate year to year, depending on how their budget is looking each year. So.
Thank you, Dan.
And in my experience, when we speak with the public, the registration fees, they're pretty straightforward. Everybody understands, yeah, I buy a new vehicle, I need to get new tags, I need to renew my tags each year. People understand that part. In my experience, the fuel tax can be confusing. I mean, really, because when you get a gallon of gas, when you're filling up at the pump, you're paying 6% sales tax on that. Michigan is unique in that there aren't many states that charge sales tax on gas, but we do. And so 6%, but that's not guaranteed money. That's not going back to the roads necessarily. Over the years, there's been discussions when the legislators and the governor's office have talked about how do we obtain more money for infrastructure, for roads and bridges. They've talked about, well, let's just take that 6% sales tax and put that towards the roads and bridges. The problem is then there's going to be a shortfall with other programs that rely on that sales tax. A lot of times they'll bring up schools. They'll say, well, where are we going to get the funding for the schools if we take that 6% sales tax at the pump and just put it towards the roads and bridges? You're also paying the federal fuel tax. I think the federal fuel tax is what, 18%, 19 or 18 cents, 19 cents, 19 cents. And so again, that's going to Washington. That's the federal fuel tax. And then you've got the state fuel tax on that. And so again, understandably, when I try to explain it to people, it can be confusing. I mean, they want to understand how much am I being taxed on a gallon of gas, and it goes to different places.
And there's some nice infographics that describe
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah.
There are.
That we have.
So one thing to note for our MTF projects are that, well, I guess backing up, so our MTF, like Matt said, this is our main source of funding. It funds all of our maintenance activities, our facilities, but we do utilize some of it for our projects. And so one thing to note, for our projects, our MTF supports all other funding sources. So some of our millage projects, it supports some of those. Some examples would be Zeeb Road. Zeeb Road was a millage project, and whenever we paved Zeeb Road, we had to add additional funds to that project, and those were MTF dollars. Whitaker and Bemis was a roundabout that was a millage project, and again, we had to add some MTF to supplement that project to make that improvement. And the one thing also to note is MTF provides the match for all of our federal aid. So federal aid comes in, and we'll learn a little bit more about federal aid in a little bit. It comes in, and then we have to match those dollars. So those can be either 80-20 for the most part, but they could be 90-10, or in some programs we have 100% funding. But even though the construction dollars, it may match those funds, we also have some of those soft costs, which are our design costs or our inspection costs for a project, which are then funded through MTF.
Commissioner Green.
I was always under the impression that millage roads were totally constructed with millage money, but you're saying there might be a shortfall in which MPF funds might come into use on a millage project?
Yeah, the one thing that we pride ourselves in through our millage is if we have it on our plan, we're gonna construct that plan, that we're gonna follow through with that plan. So as the millage, we're my next slide gets into the millage. So we're programmed to get 4.9 through the new, hopefully for the new millage. As we plan those projects, we're using planning dollars that are current planning dollars. So to mill and overlay a mile of roadway, we're looking at $220,000 approximately. Well, as that the life of that millage goes on throughout the years, cost of inflation goes up. And so then we have to supplement those funds with our MTF to make it a whole project.
Okay, that's interesting.
Another example of MTF money going into a millage project is in the current year. We have millage money going to pave Bemis Road. So Bemis Road is going to be a very expensive project, over $1 million. We only have 400,000 that is millage money. So in our budget, if we look back at the project appendix, you'll see that there's multiple sources of how that project is getting funding. And by and large, the what's left over, meaning 600,000-ish, is MTF dollars. So there are those projects where we're using millages almost it's a portion of the financial component of how it gets funded, and MTF makes up the difference. And then you've got the inflationary costs that Brent shared. So it can get complicated, particularly as you're planning a millage. We really started planning the millage last year, and we're talking about 2028. I don't know what the cost of asphalt per
Right.
ton is going to be in 2028, but I wager that it's going to be more expensive
Dan
than it
knows.
is today. Right. And so when we're making those predictions, we're not trying to assume an inflationary cost. We just assume that we're going to make up for it with MTF, Michigan Transportation Funds.
And that's our general fund.
Correct.
Another example would be, and only because it's easy for me to speak to because of my involvement with the Jackson Road project. So again, we have a project coming up on Jackson Road this construction season where we're going to remove the concrete pavement, replace it for a segment of Jackson. And that one, when the project team here at the Road Commission sat down and started to talk about the current millage, so 2021 through 2024, when they sat down in 2020 and started to lay out the potential projects, they said, well, we need to invest in Jackson Road. How much are we going to invest? In some manner, 400,000 was assigned to Jackson Road. And it said, okay, during the life of the next millage, we are going to invest this 400,000 in Jackson Road. Well, then when we started to get into the details of the project and do the hard engineering to figure out exactly what we were going to do, we determined really this is beyond repair. We need to get in and remove the pavement, replace it. And so there was an escalation cost at that point. And so the way that the budgetary numbers worked out for that project is it's 400,000 in millage money. It's $500,000 from the SIO Downtown Development Authority with thanks to the DDA for partnering with us. And then the remainder, because it's $1.5 million job, the other 600,000 is coming out of MTF. It's coming out of the road commission budget to be able to achieve that $1.5 million investment. So again, sometimes that millage program, we are matching that money to be able to accomplish the necessary scope of work.
Who was,
Just kind of curious. Right now it's concrete.
Yes,
Is it gonna be replaced with concrete or replaced with asphalt?
with concrete. Yeah, that'll go back in concrete, yes.
Yeah, again, that's a commercial corridor
Right.
and we want to maintain that concrete.
I just had a comment. I just like you giving examples of our projects. That helps me understand the funding. How it's, two different fundings are for one project. That helps that to know,
Sure.
so.
Yeah,
like it.
and one thing to note, and I appreciate that, Commissioner McCollum, and I wanted to inject a slide on here, but it was, as I was preparing for this, it was just getting too busy. But as the commissioners review our budget, you'll see that we have, and Dan has done a great job of, we have 3 columns. One is federal aid, we have contribution from others, and then what our contribution is. So you'll see funds in each one of those columns. And so you'll see, all right, this one looks like contribution from others, that's millage dollars, and then you'll see some MTF added to that. So whenever you're looking at that budget, which we have our second quarter coming up, you'll see it laid out in that fashion.
Thank you.
So the other funding source is millage. Again, we have, we're going for a renew and restore for our current millage, which ends this year. That would be 25 through 28. And we are looking at about $4.9 million for a $500,000 for the new upcoming millage, which is August 6th, part of the primary ballot. And then we'll get into some more details on the millage on what that focuses on. So one of our other funding sources, we'll have a lot of discussion here, is our federal aid. So federal aid comes from the Highway Trust Fund, the Federal Highway Trust Fund. It's broken up into 2 main categories and then another category. So the first 2 categories are our Surface Transportation Program, our STP, and then the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is HSIP, which is safety. Then we have our other, which is under the Highway Trust Fund, which is bridge funds, congestion mitigation, carbon reduction, and then our Transportation Alternatives Program. One thing to note on the carbon reduction, that was part of the new IIJA, the Infrastructure Jobs Act, that carbon reduction, which goes through 26. But that's all does fall with under that Highway Trust Fund. So these funds are broken up into our Surface Transportation Program is broken up into our urban and rural. So within our county, we have boundaries. We have an urban boundary and we have a rural boundary. And within those areas, then we receive funds from the Highway Trust Fund for those urban and rural areas based on the mileage within those areas. For our urban area, we receive about $2 million a year approximately. For our rural area, we receive about $1 million. And then those are administered through Watts, and we'll get into a little bit more later on our project selection and how Watts comes into play for our urban and rural. For our bridge, These are competitive applications, but we've been very successful part of this program. So for the upcoming 3 years, 24, 25, and 26, we're going to receive about $5.4 million over that 3-year period to improve bridges. And then I don't know if did you have something? to
Yeah,
say?
I just wanted to mention, again, if it's a federal aid project, that's administered through the Michigan Department of Transportation. Again, we don't receive the federal funds directly.
Right.
So when we're setting up a federal aid project, we work with MDOT, they're referred to as local agency programs. And basically, there's an engineer assigned at MDOT to each of our projects. We work through that engineer to basically shepherd the project through the design phase into the MDOT bid opening and then into the construction phase. So an example would be we just worked on the Miller and Z roundabout just up the road here. So that was a federal aid project. Actually, that was safety funding received. So Brent's got it up here. There's a safety program. So we received safety funding to improve that intersection. So we worked through WATS, that's the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study, to have the project programmed, to have that funding programmed. And then we worked through MDOT, through local agency programs, to take that project through design to the bid opening. MDOT actually has the bid opening, and then MDOT contracts the project. So it's interesting. It's our intersection. And we basically have prompted the improvement through pursuing the federal funds, but MDOT actually has the contract with the contractor out there. We're administering the project on behalf of MDOT. So they're intimately involved as we're working with the contractor. We have to work within the MDOT guidelines and everything. And so again, federal aid can be complicated. Because again, you're talking about a contractor who's working for MDOT, but they're working on an intersection that belongs to us. So that's just the way in which federal aid works here in the state of Michigan. Yes.
So I was wondering, when we approve these projects, we approve the MDOT ones like this?
Yeah, when I'll answer that. So when the agreements come forth, that's what you're approving. You're approving that agreement, which basically outlines, we're going to administer this project on behalf of the state. We're obligated to pay the match through our, oftentimes, like the example you use, Zebra Road at Miller had a substantial match because we had a fair amount of MTF money in it. Safety money is capped. So when you get an award for safety, oftentimes it's, all right, it's $1 million project, but we're only going to give you 600,000. So we have a need that we know about. We go after that money, but ultimately that funding is capped, and therefore we've got to find other funding sources. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we put a little bit of urban money into it, and we splashed a little MTF money into it. So it's aggregated together. That agreement has that funding breakdown. So if you look through the agreement, you'll see the funding breakdown, and then Dan knows, all right, that's how that project's set up. And when billing comes from MDOT, we can pay the invoices based upon that agreement that the board approves. So that's how that comes about. And then you'll also see it in our budget. Each of these projects listed in the budget. We don't get the funds for the federal funds directly. It doesn't come to Dan for as a big check for 600,000. It gets invested into our road system. So therefore it flows through our budget. So that money is getting invested into the intersection, one of our assets. So we make sure that it's reflected in our budget, but we don't actually pay the contractor. We get invoiced through that agreement for the local match, and we pay MDOT for it. And then they do the administering of payment to the contractor. But ultimately those investments, which are tangible, and are the road network, and that's why it's reflected into our budget. Confusing.
And I'm
No,
assuming it's,
actually-
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Commissioner.
Sorry.
I'm assuming as well that there are federal guidelines as to what constitutes a safety improvement.
Correct. Yeah. So whenever we get a call for projects under the safety program, they'll list what all those requirements are. Unfortunately, and we'll get a little bit more detail on safety later, but like safety is a more reactive type grant because it's based on crash history and yeah, but those details on what those requirements are all within that call letter. So our urban and rural we have targeted amounts that are managed through Watts for our urban and rural, and then everything else, or safety, bridge, congestion, those are all competitive grant type programs.
Thank you.
And then one thing to add on what Matt was talking about, federal aid is a reimbursement program. So we have to spend the money and then ask for the reimbursement on those funds that we expended minus our match.
I thought it was a grant first, but it's a reimbursement program.
Yeah, so whenever we go into construction for our project, we have to, when we start building that and the contractor, so we're taking in those funds and then we're paying that contractor and then we're asking for reimbursement from MDOT. Is that correct, Dan? That's the way I understand federal aid is that we're paying that contractor and then we're getting reimbursed. We're asking MDOT for reimbursement on those funds.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we're not paying them.
Right.
The road
MDOT 's
commission,
Right.
MDOT is repaying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of it, is your basic accounting rules that if work is done on a project, we have to recognize that that work is done. And at the same time, we can recognize the federal aid. If it's an 80-20, then we'd recognize 80% federal aid. And like Matt said, 20% might be MTF dollars. So we have to account for all that because those become assets of the road commission, those improvements. And so we can recognize it as such. And also, it's a lot of it's just accounting work. But we have to make sure if you have an asset here as an expense, then those revenues coming in to offset that, and you see all that in the budget too. We have a line item for federal and state funds. And then, with the project listings, you can see all the breakdown by project of where that federal aid's coming from.
Thank you.
We good?
Yes.
So part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program, so over the last 5 years, we received about $3.7 million, part of our HSIP, high risk, and part of that highway safety program, and just to confuse it even more, that's broken up into general highway safety improvements, which can be applied to both rural and urban roadways. And then you have a high risk rural road program that can only be applied to rural. And so we've received about $3 million part of that program. Both those programs fall underneath the HSIP, or the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Our congestion mitigation air quality, our CMAQ, over the last 5 years, we received about $13 million, just over $13 million part of that program. And then the new carbon reduction program, part of that IIJA, we received almost $4 million for projects, part of that program.
Do you have another question?
Yes. Would a roundabout be included in the safety improvement program or no?
It can be. We've built a roundabout, like I stated earlier, part of our millage program. We've built it part of federal aid, part of our urban dollars. We've built it part of our CMAQ dollars. And we've constructed one like the example of Miller and Zeeb, part of our safety.
Because roundabouts improve the intersection in a variety of ways.
Correct.
So you're improving the efficiency of the intersection because you can push more traffic through. You don't have people stopping and idling. So that's going to reduce that congestion, the vehicle congestion, and it's going to improve air quality.
Okay.
It potentially could reduce carbon because, again, vehicles are moving through. They're not just sitting there idling. And it improves the safety because, as we've talked about at various points in the past, you're really eliminating that risk at a traditional intersection. You've got that risk for a T-bone accident. And so, again, we can receive funding for roundabouts through a variety of means. But Miller and Zeeb, that was safety funding, federal safety funding. And then, we just started, Whitaker Road at Willis Road, that roundabout just started. And again, that's another safety
Those
project.
are
So-
federal urban dollars
Yeah.
for that one.
Is
Uh,
Elena our maven on this kind of projects? And
Elena does a lot of work on applying for our grants, so yeah, we do have to give acknowledgement to her. She puts together a lot of our CMAC and our safety funds, and then for our carbon reduction. So that's another pot of money so that carbon reduction has, we have 3 roundabouts that we're looking to install with that and a traffic signal. Then another program is our transportation alternatives, which are within the other programs. These, and we'll get into more details, these are mainly focused on townships. These funds flow through us. Those are for sidewalk or non-motorized type improvements. Universities can utilize those funds. And then the last one is earmarks. So we can also apply through some of our legislators and receive earmarked funds, which ultimately funnel through that highway trust fund. We were actually successful receiving an earmark through Congresswoman Debbie Dingell's office. We received $1 million for Hewitt Road between Packard and M17. So that's another program. Yes.
Yes, I was wondering with the transportation alternative program, is some of those funds, do they go to the border to border?
They do, yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more
Okay.
once when we get into the project selection on, our Washtenaw County Parks utilizes those TAP funds to help supplement their border to border trip.
Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge how complicated this is and the collective wisdom of everybody who has their fingers in this to
Yeah.
make it work and make sure the money comes to us and we're not penalized because we missed a deadline or had the wrong percentage. I'm still soaking up bit by bit. You are all very patient in explaining it over and over and over to me. But this is just, I guess a mosaic is the best picture in my head about how all this money comes together, and it's a blend, right? There are hardly any that are purely one revenue source anymore, it seems like.
Correct, yeah, we're pulling from a lot of different sources. Again, whenever you're looking at that diagram that I had on the very first slide, you have all these spokes coming out, trying to pull those funds in. And a lot of credits have to go to Watts. Watts is, they really help us as we're managing and programming these funds. And I'll have a slide later, but ultimately these all end up on the tip, the transportation improvement program. And all these federal aid have to end up there in order for it to be funneled through MDOT.
And somehow Dan keeps it all straight.
Well, and we'll talk about institutional knowledge, and a lot of that is passed down just during my career from Roy Townsend to Cheryl Siddle, to Matt, to Brent and I. Dan's been here throughout.
Yeah.
Again, and you have to have that institutional knowledge to understand how the federal aid works, the different pots of money that exist. And then if you start looking at it, they use different acronyms. And I don't want to get into that, but they have different acronyms for each one, and you have to understand what that means. So it is, I agree, Commissioner Fuller, it's
It's
pretty
just-
complicated.
Really want to compliment everybody for being able to figure this out all the time, right?
Yeah. So now we'll get into our project selection process. So a life of a project begins with planning, and then we have our environmental, our design, right-of-way, construction, then our maintenance and operations. So we'll mainly focus on the planning side of this, but I mean, each one of these bullets could probably have their own working session. But the planning side of it is where we're gonna focus, and we'll focus mainly on each pot of money, on how they contribute. And for each funding source, it gets a little more detailed on how you're reporting and how you move through that planning process. As we had that big, long discussion about federal aid, as you can imagine, utilizing those funds, you have to go through, you have to follow their process. You want to utilize their funds, you have to follow that federal and state process to utilize those funds. there's a little more detail and a lot of oversight, whenever you utilize those funds. But one thing that I do want to note is that for all of our projects, we do follow our policy on public engagement. So we follow that process for the most part for all of our projects, regardless if they're utilizing MTF dollars or our millage or federal aid. And then to add to that, we also, for a lot of our projects, we follow the same process for our construction inspection. And then managing how our equipment, labor, and materials are accounted for. So that helps us kind of be consistent throughout all of our projects. Of course, with federal aid, it's a little more detailed, but we do for the most part follow a lot of that same process. So our MTF, we do have MTF projects. These are mainly planned by our staff. And one example that we have in there is the Parker Road culvert. And then so our MTF projects, for the most part, the greatest amount of funds that we spend are for our culverts and our gravel road improvements. There are, of course, other projects that we utilize our MTF for. We've signalized intersections. We've installed overhead flashing beacons. So those are just a couple examples of where we've utilized and had MTF projects. But for the most part, our MTF are used for like a maintenance type project. But for our culverts, we're out there inspecting those culverts through our asset management plan, determining the condition of that culvert and determining where we can find those funds. And in a lot of cases that we may have a culvert that's deteriorating and we have to make a decision on whether we apply for funding or if we utilize our MTF to fix that.
And some of the planning component is, again, it goes back to, I mentioned institutional knowledge and also relationships with like our cities. So we had the picture of Parker Road. Parker Road is just outside the city of Dexter, right near Dexter High School. And so not only do we have to keep in mind, we've over time inspected the old culvert, and we've determined that based on structural deterioration, it needs to have a weight limit put up to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the motoring public. We have to keep an eye on that culvert. We have to establish a weight limit. And then we start looking at, all right, what other projects are going to go on in the area? And how is that going to change traffic movements? And when do we need to address the Parker Road culvert? And so, some of the things we considered at that time would be like a project to construct a roundabout at Dexter, Chelsea, and Island Lake. And we said, well, to construct that, how is that going to impact traffic movements? Well, that's going to push more traffic onto Parker Road. And so it starts, as we look at it as a project team, we start to look at when we need to perform that work. Sometimes the decision is fairly straightforward. Once a culvert or a bridge deteriorates to a point where it's got a very restrictive load limit on it, that pretty much is going to rise to the top. You're going to say, we have to address that now. Others, we have some time to work with. And so we try to be strategic in when we invest that money to actually perform the work. So again, it's kind of looking at the area, not just looking at that one spot on the map, but looking at what's going on in the area and how that's going to influence traffic movements.
Commissioner Green
So when I was a trustee with Superior Township, we had to admit that we didn't even know how many culverts there were. So who's monitoring the culverts and what shape they're in and where they're at? That seems like a real complicated task.
It is, and I'll say, I'm proud of the road commission because over time, we have greatly improved our culvert inspection and asset management program. So when we talk about bridge structures and culvert structures, and here in Washtenaw County, the road commission has jurisdiction over 126 federally listed bridges. And so the bridges, we're required by Federal Highway and by MDOT to inspect those bridges at a minimum every 2 years. As a bridge deteriorates, you have to inspect it more frequently. But again, that's only 126 structures in the county. Beyond that, the culverts, and those would be structures that have a span less than 20 feet, that's left up to the road commission. Federal Highway doesn't mandate anything, MDOT doesn't mandate anything, so that falls fully on the road commission. And so we've actively undertaken a more robust inspection program, whereby we've focused on culverts that are 5 foot in span or greater, and going back and inspecting those on a regular basis, and inspecting particularly the ones that have a weight restriction that are in poor condition, inspecting them yearly, so that we're making sure we keep an eye on that. Unfortunately, that was not always the case. Again, I worked here, my first job here at the Road Commission was in the summer of 1996 as an intern. And my job as an intern was to go out, and that was very early on in the Road Commission's effort to do culvert inspections. And I would go out every day in a county pickup, and I would drive up and down every county road and try to find each culvert that was on that road. And so it wasn't a bad job for an intern. I got to spend a lot of time outdoors, and I became intimately familiar with the culverts and with the county roads. But again, there are thousands of culverts. Again, we keep a focus on those that are 5 foot diameter or greater. There's countless culverts that are smaller than that. That might be a 12-inch diameter culvert or an 18-inch diameter culvert. And I'll give a lot of credit to our district foreman, because again, those district foremen become so familiar with their area that we work closely with them. When they spot a problem on the road, they're bringing it back and having a discussion with engineering about, okay, I think we've got a 2 foot diameter culvert out here that needs to be addressed. So.
And I'll add to that, we have a geographic information system, GIS. So GIS, we account for all of our culverts, meaning anything that's 5 foot to 20, and then also anything from 12 inches all the way up to 5 feet. Fortunately, as part of our township booklets, we convey that with a map. So the map of the township is given to them. We identify any culverts that are in poor condition from 5 to 20. And that way we can start planning for, hey, we've got to start thinking about and prioritizing what investments we have for the culverts on local roads. Primary roads, that's on us, absolutely 100% on us. And we're managing that inventory, but we've come a long ways in getting all that information and managing those assets using GIS, using our inspection schedules. We don't inspect culverts between 12 and 5 because we're just going to take care of that ourselves if we have a failure. And oftentimes when we're doing local road investments or primary road investments, our engineering and operations departments are working together to assess, all right, if we're going to resurface this road, we've got to go do the culverts that are in need of replacement. So that is, we've come a long way in the last, I would say, 15 years with culverts. And we've had the good fortune of sharing our experience. In fact, we've presented at CRA a couple different times of how we are managing our culvert system. So it's definitely an important part of our project workload. And I will mention most of our discussions today are involving projects on primary roads. Yeah. Local roads is another program we have. And it's its own local road program. You're very familiar. That comes to the board every year. But this discussion is really around our primary road system.
Commissioner McCollum, did you have?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, looking at the picture for Parker Road, you know, my first thought, I'm thinking, oh, that they put in a nice portion of the road, but it really was the culvert.
Yeah.
And then there's more funding, not just the culvert, but also the surrounding area. You gotta replace that and everything.
Yeah, you have to restore once
Restore.
you come in and put the new culvert in, then you have to restore the pavement, restore the shoulders and the
Right.
ditches, put guardrail up.
Right.
Yeah, so it's it all.
And that little spot on that road was over $500,000.
I believe it,
Nice.
okay.
And we have quite the SWAT team for the smaller culverts too, right?
do.
I mean, they're doing
Yeah,
it-
this one we ended up contracting
Yeah,
out,
this is a
but,
bigger job. yeah.
yes, we've done a lot of culverts like this with our own crews, which saves a lot of money.
Yeah, and Matt, I appreciate you mentioning the benefits and what a positive impact GIS has had.
Yeah.
Working with Alan Squire and because again, just looking back when I was an intern here, when I did find a culvert, I had a big copy, black and white copy of the SERP map, and I would draw a dot.
Yep.
So I would try to estimate how far was I from that intersection, and I would use the odometer on the truck and say, well, it rolled over and it was maybe about 0.2
Yep.
miles from the intersection. So we had these maps with just dots, little red dots that I had put on there. Again, it's far more advanced beyond that. And it's really, it's so beneficial to be able to use that GIS, to use that powerful tool to keep track of those assets.
And our foremen have laptops in their trucks that can access that database and look at what's on this road I'm on currently, and even can locate the culvert themselves if need be.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way.
And they add things now and then, right? that they
Absolutely.
That's
discovered
right.
Didn't have on the map.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll go out and replace a 2-foot diameter culvert.
Uh-huh.
And then they can actually capture that location and that information. So over time, we start to gain more and more data about where all these assets are located.
The number is growing.
Yes.
Yes.
We're good? Mhm. Okay.
Then we get into our millage projects. And again, this is a collaborative effort, not only amongst those within engineering or within the road commission, between engineering operations and to determine what type of projects go into our plan, but it's also with our townships. So we collaborate with them, we share the plan and make some adjustments based on their feedback. We've mainly focused on our primary road system for our millage projects. And then we put the money that's raised in a community goes back into that community. And we use our asset management practices. We focus on preventative maintenance, which may be a chip seal or a mill and overlay, some type of gravel road improvement. We're utilizing those those preventative maintenance practices are in our asset management practice to determine what type of fix. It's all about applying the right fix at the right time and at the right place. And our goal is to extend the service life of the road, part of our millage program.
I think it's important to note the money goes back into the community over the life of the 4-year millage.
Correct.
So when people say, oh, so next summer you're gonna be like, well, maybe, but it'll be there eventually.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and the way I describe that is we're not stealing from Peter to pay Paul. So we're looking at, the revenue that's generated
Yep.
through the millage in, for instance, Pittsfield Township, Ypsilanti Township, Scioto Township, and then comparing that to some of like our western townships. And again, you're going to generate more millage revenue in a more urbanized area than you would a more rural area. So we make sure that we look at the amount of revenue that's generated, and then how much we're gonna put back into that specific township.
And we approved that plan for the next 4-year
We did.
We
Yep.
did.
So the board approved the plan.
last time or time before?
It was a few meetings
Couple
ago.
meetings ago, yeah.
But I also want to take note, it's a half mil, but it's 80% of that half mil is what we're talking about that goes to roads. So the 80% raised in that township goes back into that township. Just that 20% then goes to county parks, and then they have various programs in which they invest, and townships have an opportunity to access that through connecting communities and whatnot. But for that 80%, that's really what we're talking about, going back into the communities.
Right, and you had a slide on that earlier.
I
in
did,
your
yeah, and I can go
presentation.
back to that, yep,
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what's generated.
Yep.
That half mil. So here's just a few projects that we've built through our millage program. Textile Road was built last year between Crane and Munger. That was resurfaced. It's a mill and overlay. Bemis Road between Moon and Warner is another project. Then we have a non-motorized project, which is the border trail, segment D3. This project actually, the Washtenaw County Parks utilize their millage dollars to leverage federal funds. And those were through TAP, through the Transportation Alternative Program. They received about $2 million in TAP funds for that segment. Another over $2 million of local funds went into that project as well. But they were able to leverage some of those millage and some other funding to make that improvement. Now we'll get into our federal aid.
Could I just suggest, it's 10 o'clock. Do
Yes.
people want to take a 5-minute break? Are we doing all right? You want to press on?
Okay.
You okay? You want to take a break? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, the
Let's
next
recess
segment
the-
is,
Is
yeah,
this a good point?
this is a great
To
point.
take a little breather?
Yes.
Okay, okay. Let's try and get back here as soon as you can. Okay. You are working session at this point in time, picking up on planning with federal aid dollars. Brett,
Yep, Brent Schlack, Director of Engineering. Go ahead.
Aaron Burkholz, Assistant Director of Engineering.
So now we'll get into our federal aid planning. And just like when we went through the funding, this is just as complicated. But it also, yeah. Yeah, it is a long process, but it all begins with our long range plan, for the most part. And I'll explain why I say for the most part, in a little bit later, but our long range plan, this sets our vision for the future, identifies the goals and performance measures, in providing policy guidance, and then we provide a list of projects. And those list of projects fall within these 5 categories: pavement preservation, safety, bridges, environmental congestion, and non-motorized. So we provide that list to Watts and ultimately SEMCOG for our long-range plan. And our most current plan is our 2050 long-range plan. And that provides our, the list of projects within these categories. And the reason I had stated earlier, for the most part, is although we try to look at that vision for the future, it does not preclude us from, if we see some need in utilizing federal aid and putting that within our transportation improvement plan, our TIP, which I'll explain a little bit later. So the long range plan is just our vision for the future that we see, but it doesn't preclude us from adding projects at a later time.
I would just add, it's much like in a township, they have a long range vision for like a land use master plan. And that doesn't mean it's going to come to fruition next year. That's kind of like what this is for the transportation side. 2050 is a long ways away, but you have to work towards it. So this is what feeds our 5-year plan for the or 4-year plan for the transportation improvement projects, the TIP. So this feeds the TIP typically.
Correct.
But you also have those competitive grants. And if you get an award for a competitive grant, it automatically goes into that TIP. So to Brent's point, it doesn't always have to be in the long range plan, but most times it's going to fall into one of these categories
Correct.
that are in the long range plan.
Aaron, did you have something?
I was gonna say, for the benefit of those that might watch this recording later, when we talk about Watts, that's the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study. And when we talk about SEMCOG, that's the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. So again, both agencies that we interact with, organizations that we interact with, that are planning organizations. And again, with our focus of today's presentation being planning.
Right, and the 2050 long-range plan was approved last week at the Watts policy, and now it goes to SEMCOG,
Correct.
and
yes.
from there it goes to federal highway, right?
Yes.
So this is this is a ladder that we climb.
Now we'll get into our federal aid for our urban and rural. This is a 4-year plan that's developed by our local federal aid committee, our FAC. So our FAC is made up of all the Act 51 agencies within our county. So all the cities and the road commission are part of that FAC. And these are administered by the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study, WATS. And again, we're looking at the urban and rural program within those same categories that fall within that long range plan. They're scoring our projects that we submit for our rural and urban. Again, our urban, we have an urban boundary within our county. For the most part, it's the Ann Arbor urban, but we also have a little bit of South Lyon urban dollars that we receive. And then we have our rural area. And they fall within they're scored within these categories. Again, our urban and rural, we mainly are focused on our preventative maintenance, maintaining the life of that pavement, but we do provide like the Whitaker and Willis project, that intersection. We also have reconstructed roads like Under Road, Ann Arbor Saline Road. So we've done projects through our urban and rural dollars that are more than just preventative maintenance. And then to just confuse it even more, part of our rural program, we have Category D funds. Category D are for our all-season roadways, and we receive about $100,000 a year, part of that Category D. For our urban area, we have NHPP funds, which are our National Highway Performance Program funds. And we receive about $360,000, but that's shared with the city of Ann Arbor. So we have a 4-year program. We would get 2 years and they would get 2 years. The National Highway Performance Program, they're mainly focused on those arterial routes that fall on the national highway system. And they can be urban or rural. And those are like our Jackson Road, Plymouth Road, Carpenter Road, Ellsworth Road, City of Ann Arbor would have State Road, and I guess State Road for us as well. And again, these are shared, and we receive about $360,000 for NHPP.
Will
And
you
again, those
say
are-
the category D stuff one more time? A
Yes.
million? Was that
Yeah, $100,000.
100,000?
And the D comes from the state.
Yes.
So that is a state funding program. It's basically economic development money. Comes out of their office. There's different categories. This one's category D.
Thank you.
And I will say, in my career, it's been a pleasure to serve on the Federal Aid Committee. And it's a very good group that works together to administer that program. We've got great partners in Washtenaw County. The other thing I will mention, the rural dollars, there's only one agency that can receive that in Washtenaw County, that's us. So we don't have to do much competing. We just try and prioritize the needs in our rural primary system.
An example of a project that fairly recently would receive Category D funds would be Carpenter Road. So again, Carpenter Road is an all-season road. When we talk about an all-season road, if you look at our truck operators map, it's a blue line on there. And basically, all-season means that when the road commission applies seasonal weight restrictions, AKA frost laws, it does not apply to that road. Basically, that road has been constructed in a manner that it can handle the full legal load year round. So again, that Category D has to be in a rural part of the county, and it has to be on an all-season road. So it gets where it's pretty specific what roads we can use that on.
Yeah, another example is Whitmore Lake or Dexter Chelsea, Old US 12. Those are category D eligible.
Did you have a question?
Yes. These percentages are determined by us or them?
No, the targets are set based on the federal amount that we're receiving. So Washtenaw Area Transportation Study will, whenever we're going through that tip development, through the federal aid committee. And we're getting ready we're prepping for the next tip cycle, which would be 26 through 29. And they would then push out what those targets are, how much funds we would receive, part of our urban and rural, and then our category D, and our NHPP funds. So then we take those dollars and through our federal aid, then we try to divvy it up based on and develop a list of projects.
Okay.
I don't know if
guess
that
I'm
answered your
wondering-
question or not.
So this is 45% for pavement. So I'm wondering.
Oh, so the percentage that you see there, that's how they're scored. So we receive about $10 million of federal aid for our whole area.
Okay,
And so then, for our whole tip cycle, for our 4 years. And then so Watts would then look at the projects that we're putting forth, to utilize the urban or rural, and they're scoring them based on these percentages.
I said this is, so
Targets,
Their targets, correct?
these are Watts targets then.
correct.
Correct.
Okay,
And then between the city and road commission, we're submitting projects that hopefully will meet the targets. That's the goal. Oftentimes, our projects are a little more focused on pavement, preventive maintenance, because as we have argued, not argued, but made the point that we are very good at getting competitive grants for safety, for bridges, for congestion, for TAP, that we really need our urban and rural dollars to be focused more on pavement.
Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, I would have never thought Carpenter Road was an all-season road because it is a nice road. And I know how the heavy vehicles and go over roads on numerous times, how they look and feel. And so you must really keep up with that road.
Yeah, that's we have to invest, right? We have to
Right.
invest in those roads for, Jackson Road, for instance, not only the concrete portion, but the HMA, the asphalt portion. We have to keep up on that roadway, that either through our preventative maintenance or even through what Adam and his group does to help keep those roadways in good shape.
So question, on our county map, have we identified with a color or a
Yeah,
treatment what our all-season roads are, or is that a
That-
separate?
That would be our truck operators map.
Okay.
So our truck operators map will show the designated routes, which are all season.
And that's on our website, I assume,
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
but it's the truck
We have printed
operators
copies as
map.
well. If you would like one, I will get you one.
Small one. Commissioner McCollum.
No, I was saying I would like one.
Okay.
Absolutely.
right? Yes.
We'll get one.
So now sticking with federal aid, we also have our local safety program. Again, this involves the highway safety improvement program and that high-risk rural road dollars. These are competitive grants. It's a reactive process where we're looking at crashes. We utilize the MDOT local safety initiative. This is where MDOT comes in and they evaluate our whole roadway system, whether that's an intersection or segment of road, and they make suggestions on improvements for safety for that. And we can use that as part of our competitive grant process to help elevate whenever they score those grants. We get additional points for that. We also, and there's a new system, it's called the safety system approach. This is how we are evaluating crashes. What that system looking at is it's more of a proactive process. So we're trying to identify a crash pattern or an issue in a certain area, and then we're taking that same pattern and we're applying that to similar locations or situations throughout our county. And we can do that through this safety program that MDOT puts out for federal funds. And like Matt stated earlier, they have increased the cap. These are capped funds. So it was 600,000, now they're $750,000. Again, those funds get spent quickly depending on the safety improvement, but it is a capped fund whenever we apply for these grants.
Yeah, I will point out, anytime we doing an intersection improvement, it seems like we're spending $1 million. Every time we're doing widenings or signalizing or doing a roundabout, you're spending $1 million. So the safety funds are an outstanding funding source, but they are limited, and we have to recognize we're gonna have to make sure we program enough MTF or other funding sources to make that project happen. And one of the things, we'll give an example, North Territorial Road, we've gotten several safety projects. They're able to make the case, for instance, we have a fair number of people leaving the road. For whatever reason, they end up leaving the road and having an accident. So some of the things that we have been able to do is extend culverts or better safe situation where we're extending the culverts and replacing culverts. We're doing rumble strips, that generally speaking, centerline rumble strips, enhanced pavement markings and signing, intersection improvements like Dexter Town Hall was an example, and we're currently underway, about halfway done with Webster Church intersection. So that's a corridor that we continue to enhance with safety improvements, hoping to address some of the crashes and the patterns that we're seeing.
Commissioner Green.
When you describe this as a reactive process, does that mean that a certain number of crashes have to happen before we get the
Correct.
funds for improving it?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it's reactive, and we have to have not only a certain number of crashes, but a certain type of crash. And those are mainly the serious injury and fatality type crashes to be selected as part of that grant program.
And an example, and Matt mentioned it, is at North Territorial and Dexter Town Hall Road. You know, that was a safety grant that funded the improvements there. It was a variety of improvements that were made. The most notable part of the improvement was the hill cut on the west leg of the intersection, where we lowered the hill by approximately 6 feet to provide better sight distance for traffic that's on Dexter Town Hall Road trying to turn onto North Territorial Road. But again, there were a variety of other fixes that were performed. We replaced a crossroad culvert. We added centerline rumble strips. We replaced the permanent signs. So again, each component is intended to improve the safety. There's a development, residential home development going on right now in the southwest corner of that intersection. A large farm parcel where they're doing land balancing right now to get ready for homes. And people have asked us, with all the work you did at the intersection, you cut the hill, you added centerline rumble strips, you widened the intersection to put a left turn pocket on North Territorial. Why didn't you put up a signal? You just put the flashing signal back up. They said you should have just gone ahead and put a signal up. We've constructed the intersection so that when the intersection meets warrants at some point in the future for a signal, we can put that signal up if funding's available for that. But again, I understand sometimes the public's perception is, well, you know, there's going to be a problem, so why don't you just take care of it? That crystal ball can be very murky. Like, I don't know, because there's more traffic from the home development, you don't know what direction those people are gonna go in. And so again, sometimes it is a reactive process where, hey, we're going to see what happens at this intersection now that we've reconstructed it. Now that there's going to be some traffic added as there are more homes in the area, and then we're going to determine if there's the need for a signal there. But ultimately, there has to be funding to make that type of improvement.
Okay.
Okay. Sticking with federal aid, then we get into our CMAQ, which is congestion mitigation air quality. This focuses mainly on the carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide, improving the air quality. We are within that attainment area, So we receive, we have to apply for, it's a competitive process. We have to apply for these grants. And some examples are Plymouth Corridor, which is actually in the picture. So this is Plymouth Road. There was an incident on M14. So Plymouth Road between, or on US 12, US 23. So there was an incident on US 23. Actually, I think the incident was on M14. But Plymouth Road goes between US 23, well, into the city, but our jurisdiction from US 23. The project goes through M153 or Ford Road. So a lot of folks will jump off the freeway if there's an incident on M14 or US 23 and utilize the local system. And so Plymouth Road is an example of where we applied for these CMAQ dollars and we were awarded, I believe, over $1 million to improve the signal operation and actually made it into an adaptive system so that it can adjust based on the how much traffic is on that roadway. Some other examples are Anna Marceline Maple Corridor. This is actually in partnership with the city of Saline. This goes from along Maple Road and along Ann Arbor Saline Zone. So Maple Road from US 12 through Ann Arbor Saline Road, and then from Ann Arbor Saline from Maple to I-94. So that's a partnership, and those received CMAQ dollars again to improve the operation of those signals to move traffic more efficiently. Another example is Main Street or our Main Street, Dexter, Chelsea, Island Lake. We have a combination of improvements. The main focus is the roundabout that we're looking at Dexter, Chelsea, and Island Lake. But also that fund also is looking at the intersections through the city of Dexter. So it's in partnership with the city of Dexter for that program or for that project.
So that's a signalization improvement
Correct.
effort, because
Yes.
downtown Dexter is
Yeah, so it's looking at all the
a
traffic.
choke point is what I would
Yeah,
call it.
all the traffic signals through Main Street, and then putting a roundabout at Dexter, Chelsea, and Island Lake, and then improving the signalized intersection at Dexter, Pinckney, and Island Lake.
Oh, okay. So the other side of the railroad trestle, the west.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and again, oftentimes the CMAQ, the focus will be is improving traffic signals, more modern signals, better communication between signals along corridor. Because again, if you can improve the communication between the signals and you have a modern signal system, you can better and more efficiently move that traffic. So again, you're addressing construction, it talks about congestion mitigation and air quality. If you're keeping that traffic moving, there's less congestion, that improves the air quality. So oftentimes it relates to traffic signals.
Mhm.
And those two examples, those are currently under construction. And then the last one, we're in the design phase.
Yes.
Yes.
It's
That
actually
one's
26, fiscal year
2027.
26.
Oh, okay, 2026. My apologies.
And when we talk about fiscal years, so the fiscal year, when we work with MDOT, with federal aid funding, the fiscal year ends September 30th. And then the new fiscal year starts October 1st. So sometimes we'll talk about that we're going to bid a project in one fiscal year and then construct it in the following year. That sometimes will occur based on during the design phase, looking at the challenges that may exist on a given project, or based on when we're notified that we've received funding. So again, I thought I'd touch on the fact that when we talk about fiscal years, sometimes you'll hear us throw out like, oh, well, that job's gonna be in 26. What we're talking about is fiscal year 26.
But our fiscal year is the calendar year,
Correct.
Yes.
but the state of Michigan starts October 1.
Yes.
Then we have our carbon reduction program. Again, this was a competitive grant process. We were successful with this grant. Again, this is mainly focused on the CO2, the carbon dioxide, reducing that within the air. So we we've received, several projects. Three of them are roundabouts and one's a traffic signal. And, those are listed there, Whitaker and Martz, the Hearn River Drive, Joy, Mast, intersection. That one will receive, the funding is through the carbon reduction, Parker and Shield, and then Dixboro and Pontiac Trail. And then again, that's through that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, program.
Commissioner Green.
So I'm assuming that these are projects that are designed to keep the traffic moving.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, it's to reduce that carbon dioxide, from the vehicles.
And all these existing intersections have some form of stop control. So during the stop control, during the peak periods of the day, you're gonna get a lot of congestion, a lot of cars stacking up. And so that improvement will alleviate that.
Then we get into our, federal aid for bridges, and Aaron, he's lived through this program. He can describe a little bit more detail than I can, through our bridge funding that we received.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. No, and I've worked with the bridges for many, many years. I mentioned my first job as an intern was culverts. And then when I hired in back in full-time in the fall of 1997, after I graduated, my focus was the bridge inventory, the bridges that are cared for and overseen by the road commission. At that time, it was called the Critical Bridge Program. So that was the federal aid funding that was available for bridges. We would prepare and submit applications. It was a competitive process. But to fast forward, currently, they've changed the name. Now it's called the Local Bridge Program. I think to some extent, the word critical made the public a little bit nervous, and people understandably get nervous about bridges when they drive across them. They're counting on that structure to be a reliable and safe structure. And so now it's the Local Bridge Program. Again, it's still an application process. It's competitive, and it's within our region. So there's a regional bridge council. We're within the university region. And the region it's overseen, the Regional Bridge Council is overseen by MDOT, but the council itself is made up of Act 51 agency representatives that offer their names and volunteer basically for a seat on that Regional Bridge Council. We're very fortunate here that Nate Murphy, our senior project manager in design and construction, Nate holds a seat on that Regional Bridge Council. And basically, the bridge applications that come into the Regional Bridge Council are scored, and it's based on a variety of variables. They look at how deteriorated is the bridge that's being applied for? You know, how does it carry a weight restriction? They look at where is the bridge located? If it had to be closed, what would it impact? Are there schools? Are there hospitals? Is it in a commercial area? They look at how long is the detour. So if it had to be closed, how long would people have to drive around to get around the closure? And so basically based on that scoring, they have a list. They set up a list of bridges, you know, from the first bridge going through the last that was applied for. Each Act 51 agency currently is limited to 4 applications per year. And so we have to be very thoughtful about which bridges we pursue. We look at, again, we internally look at before we apply, how well are they going to score? Because we want to submit the bridges that are more likely to receive the funding. And once that Regional Bridge Council has, we'll say, ranked the bridges, then they look at how much funding they have within the region. And basically they draw a line and say, okay, we've got this much money. When you submit an application, you submit an estimate for how much it's going to cost to either replace the bridge, to rehabilitate the bridge, or to do preventative maintenance on the bridge. So replacement is pretty easily understood. One of the more recent projects where we replaced a bridge was on Dennison Road down in York Township, down near Milan. And I've mentioned it before, but that was a fairly straightforward bridge project. The old bridge, the new bridge spans the Saline River. The bridge that we installed, that we constructed is a single span. So it's a foundation on one side of the river, a foundation on the other side. We call those abutments. And basically it's a single span across that's about 100 feet long. The bridge is 2 lanes wide. And that location, it cost $2 million to build that new bridge. And so it's very expensive. It's a dot on the map where there was an investment of $2 million. We were fortunate that we received funding through the local bridge program. We received federal funds on that. And that basically the funding share on that was 90% federal funds and 10% road commission funds. So again, it's very much worth our while to pursue those funds because bridges are so expensive. One of the more recent developments with the local bridge program is, again, as they're scoring the bridges, because of the limited funding that's available, if you as an agency, us as the road commission, are willing to offer a greater match on our part, then they'll consider the bridge. The bridge basically will move up the list. So more recently, we've offered, well, we'll pay 20% of the cost if we can get 80% through federal funding. You can adjust that percentage so that you have a competitive advantage against other bridges that are within the region. So again, replacement would be like Dennison Road. Rehabilitation would be the replacement of a bridge's beams and deck. So again, you look at the foundation. A recent example is Cherry Hill Road. We were just notified that we received funding through the local bridge program for Cherry Hill Road over in Superior Township. That bridge, the foundations are in good condition. We refer to it as the superstructure. That's the beam and the deck and the railing system. They've deteriorated. So that one, when we put the application, we applied for rehabilitation on that. And the intention with that funding would be, is that we would remove everything from the beams up and replace that in new. So, and then you've got preventative maintenance. So preventative maintenance, an example would be the Mast Road Bridge on the north side of Dexter near the old cider mill. And again, preventative maintenance would be like concrete repairs. It would be putting like a new wearing surface on the deck. It would be like railing upgrades. So again, the bridge itself structurally is in good condition. It just needs some TLC, if you will. So there's different amount of funds that are assigned by the Regional Bridge Committee or Regional Bridge Council for those different types of bridge repairs or bridge replacements. And then if a bridge is very expensive, the region is not going to have enough money to cover that bridge cost. And then there is a separate council called the Major Bridge Council. And again, that council is made up of Act 51 agencies overseen by MDOT. But if a bridge that you've applied for exceeds a certain percentage of the money that's within the region is going to kick it to the Major Bridge Council. They're going to say, we don't have enough money in this region to cover this cost. So then you're competing against other bridges statewide because again, they have a certain amount of money for the major bridge projects. Separate from all of that is the MDOT Bridge Bundle Program. So basically that is a fairly new program where MDOT has looked at bridges that they have jurisdiction over, so MDOT bridges, but also looking at Act 51, like local road agency bridges. So bridges that would be owned maybe by the road commission or by cities, and trying to bundle those bridges together to basically achieve a better price, you know, where they look at, if they're able to group 6 bridges together and bid them out together, there's a cost, what's the term I'm looking for? There's economy of scale.
Scale,
Thank
yes.
you, Adam. Yeah, so there's an economy of scale. If you hire one contractor to do preventative maintenance on 6 bridges, your unit price is going to be better than that. So.
Commissioner McClung.
Yes, the Major Bridge Council, their funding, sounds like their funding would be much larger than the Bridge Council, right?
It is, but unfortunately not large enough. I'll say throughout my career, the one unfortunate consistent story is there is not enough money for bridge work. And bridge work has gotten very expensive. Just in the last, I'll say 5 years, bridge, contractor pricing on bridges is essentially doubled. So bridge work is very competitive, very expensive. But again, very critical because of the nature of bridges and how much we rely on them to get back and forth, so.
Thank you.
Then we'll discuss the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is another federal aid program. This is mainly focused on, Washtenaw County Parks applies for these funds, townships or colleges. And it all funnels through our budget because we're the Act 51 agency. So those funds come through us. Again, this is a competitive grant process. They're scored. They can either be through SEMCOG or MDOT. MDOT has their own funding and our own program where they score these. And again, these are for bicycle or pedestrian safety improvements. And some examples are the Border Trail, which we had talked about, and there's been several segments of that. Washtenaw Community College, they put a pathway along here in River Drive. And the Platte Road Greenway, which is Pittsfield Township project. That was another TAP program. We have several of these. Superior Townships applied for some. And Pittsfield Townships applied for quite a few of these as well. And then of course, some Washtenaw Community College, University of Michigan, that was for the Dixboro pathway. They received some TAP funds at, of course, Washtenaw County Parks.
Yeah, and we talk about, we've used the term Act 51 agency. Again, those are agencies like the Road Commission, City of Ann Arbor, City of Dexter, City of Chelsea, that basically receive funding through the Act 51 formula. And that Act 51 formula was established by Public Act 51 of 1951. So again, the focus is the agencies that we would partner with on these TAP grants are not Act 51 agencies. So Washtenaw County Parks is not an Act 51 agency. Pittsfield Township is not an Act 51 agency. If they're going to pursue this TAP funding, they have to partner with someone. And oftentimes that'll be partnering with us. And so we administer the project on behalf of, for example, Washtenaw County Parks. We're currently working on the Border to Border Trail segment D3 out here along Huron River Drive. But we're a pass-through agency where we've partnered with them, we've worked with them to facilitate the availability of that TAP funding, and it'll show up in our budget. But again, really, the funding is for the purposes of constructing a non-motorized trail.
Yeah, often these are community-driven projects. We are the partnership, and we don't put any funding into the project. Ultimately, all costs beyond the grant is the responsibility of whoever we're partnering with, including our staff time.
So do we take responsibility for the paperwork associated with a TAP grant,
Yes.
Yes.
which can be significant, right? So
Yes.
is
Yes.
there an administrative
So
accommodation in the funding?
Yeah, we would develop an agreement with that local, with Washtenaw County Parks or with the township, and that would include whatever costs for our staff.
So as additional communities become cities, transition to from village to, does that increase the number of Act 51 agencies in our county, which further splinters the funding?
So if they're a village, they would still receive Act 51. They would still be an Act 51
So for example,
agency.
Manchester went from village to
Village to
city,
a
Dexter
city.
went from village to Chelsea went from, it didn't change how many Act 51 agencies actually we had.
No.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, so with the Border to Border Trail, I have seen, like an invoice, like a reimbursement to the Washtenaw County Road Commission.
Mhm.
but we don't. But at some point we did put money in, right? No?
No,
No.
no. So ultimately, what we'll do is we'll charge to the project. And then on a monthly basis, we're invoicing county parks for any expenses. Because we have an agreement before we start any work on TAP grant that was approved. Well, the first step is an agreement with that partner. Basically identifying roles and responsibility. Our role is administering it. They're the ones that are responsible for paying for it and for our time to administer.
So we get the grant money and then
We don't actually get the money. Again, it's much like any federal aid. MDOT essentially pays the contractor for using those TAP funds that are programmed. So we don't receive the funds directly. We program them through the Transportation Improvement Plan, the TIP. And then ultimately we work with MDOT to design, bid, and construct. We are the responsible agency to administer that process, but we're not recipients directly of the funds. They flow through our budget, but we don't see the funds directly.
okay. So when they are paying us, that goes to MDOT or?
So no, the federal funds go to the contractor directly from MDOT. They invoice us for the match. We pay the match and then turn around and invoice the partner for
Okay.
that match, and then we'll receive the reimbursement for the match. So we don't wait to get the bill, or as soon as we get the bill from MDOT, we pay it knowing that we've got an agreement that our partner will pay us back essentially. And it's usually quick turnaround times.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot.
No,
But I
it's-
understood, I
Makes
understood
it more
everything.
complicated,
Yeah, I know.
right? You know, whose job is that?
And it's very important because of the complexity that we outline all this in agreements. So that's where the board will see those agreements with our partners or agreements with MDOT, which are defining roles, responsibilities, and financial component of that, making sure who's paying for what.
Okay.
And
So
an
we're not
example-
left holding the bag.
Agreed.
An example of the costs, just to use the ongoing project that we're working on right now, the border to border segment D3. In construction phase, you would have inspection costs, you'd have materials testing costs, you'd have an office technician who's basically keeping track of all the pay items and making sure that that's reported to MDOT, so that then MDOT in turn can pay the contractor for the work as the contractor is performing the work. So you've got the cost of a project manager. So the project manager for that project is Michelle Ford. And Michelle basically is charging her time to it. So as she's putting her time into the kiosk here at the Road Commission, we're keeping track of how much time is Michelle spending. And then as those costs are incurred, we're billing Washtenaw County Parks for that. So again, as Matt said, basically, we're not paying out of the Road Commission funding for the construction of that job.
And those costs are not insignificant. Typically, that's a $4 million project. Usually 10 to 15% of that is those soft costs of either design or construction. So you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So it's significant. Oftentimes we're getting help from consultants on the design side and sometimes the construction engineering side of things, but someone from the Road Commission manages all that.
And lastly, for our federal aid, our earmarks. Again, I brought it up, Congresswoman Jingle. We received a community project fund for Hewitt Road. Again, we applied through her process for those funds, and then she had worked through the Federal Register to get those recognized part of the part of that highway trust fund. And so we will receive those. We'll work through MDOT to receive those funds. The interesting part about earmarks is it bypasses both Washtenaw Area Transportation Study and SEMCOG, Southeast Council of Governments. And it goes directly to MDOT planning. And MDOT then administers those earmarked funds.
Commissioner Green.
So what might be described as an earmark? Can you give me an example?
So those are funds that they're taking off the top of some of those programs, and they're applying it to the community who applies for those. So Congresswoman Dingle is our advocate and down in DC, Washington DC, and we're applying for these community-driven projects and saying our example would be Hewitt Road. We want to make that a complete street. We want to reconstruct the road, add bike lanes, add a sidewalk. And so we're applying through her process to say why this is good for the community. And then she's then advocating on our behalf to have those funds taken off the top for that project.
So is this an additional source of funding or just kind of a redirection of funds?
It's kind of it's not a consistent source of funding. It's one that we apply for and receive funds.
I will say that they're rare. They don't happen a lot. It isn't something you can count on. And they've changed over the course of my career. Earmarks, kind of a dirty word at times. So they have changed how they do these things. And I think for the better. Oftentimes there'll be stipulations saying this has to be in the tip. So it's already programmed at some level and you're needing additional funds. For the case that we made on Hewitt was, we have this project, it's going to be resurfacing, meaning it's a 5 to 7 year fix, so to speak. We would like to do a 20-year fix. In order to do that 20-year fix, we need another $1 million. Can you help us? And in this case, we were able to fill out the form, meet all the criteria, because there's a lot of criteria when it comes to these community project funding, not earmarks. And in order to meet that criteria, you've got to show it's gone through a planning process, it's demonstrating a need, what is that need, and what are the benefits to the community. For this one, it was, hey, instead of just resurfacing the street, let's connect the sidewalks. Let's make it a complete street. Let's make it wider shoulders. All that will take additional funds to accomplish. And here's how we can show that benefit. And fortunately, we got the support of the Congresswoman's office, and it made it into ultimately a law for what they approved in DC. And then ultimately MDOT gets notified, sometimes a little slower than we find out from Congresswoman's office. Hey, we were successful, but it doesn't get programmed till later. So it's complex. Oftentimes we're applying for community projects that don't get funding. I'd say definitely our success rate of these is few and far between. And it's not because of the efforts of our representatives. It's just because there are so many needs out there that you're competing at a much higher level. And oftentimes, they go a different direction.
So as we brought up, is the tip for our federal aid. So that's Transportation Improvement Program. We're in the middle of our current tip cycle of 23 through 26. And we're going to start very soon on the next cycle, which is that 26 through 29. All of our federal aid has to be put on this tip. And this is a list of projects and show the programming, show the funding. It's a transparent process. And this utilizes those long-range plan categories. And again, all the federal aid is placed and programmed through this tip in order for us to move that project forward.
Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, so what picture are we looking at? That looks fantastic, all the way down the road.
I don't know. I'll have to look at that
Yeah.
program and see what the credits are for that. I'm not sure because the SEMCOG or the Southeast
Oh, they
Council of
send
Governments, that includes, Washtenaw County, Livingston County, Wayne County, Macomb County, Oakland County, St. Clair County. All those, Monroe County, so all of those counties are within that Southeast Council of Governments. So I'm not quite sure exactly where that.
That's fine.
But I can let you know. So then to just wrap it all up, and we talked a little bit and touched on our asset management plan, and this will kind of foreshadow our future, working session, which will be in August, our August 20th working session. We're required by law to have an asset management plan. Our new plan will encompass the years of 24 through 26. And then this lists all of our projects that we have, both are funded and unfunded. And so we have to submit this plan to MDOT. And so our final plan will be approved by this board in September following that working session. And then we'll submit it to the state of Michigan in October, when it's due in October. So our required assets, part of this plan are all of our paved roads, our bridges, traffic signals, and our sewers and culverts. So our stormwater management system, or stormwater system. And with that, let's our presentation
all?
on road funding and project selection. Correct.
This was the short version.
Yeah.
Any questions, commissioners?
I just have a comment. Very
Please.
good presentation. Understood 90% of it.
Well, that's great.
So I think you did a very good job. And this being presented to the public, I think they're going to understand a lot of it, which is so helpful.
Yeah, and I would say certainly as you start to think more about, if you have any questions, feel free to touch base with myself or Aaron or even Matt. I mean, we all live through this federal aid and all the other project. And so if you have any questions, feel free to come.
Thank you.
And that 2050 plan gets published soon. It's an actual somewhat of a bound document. So
Yes.
we'll have copies if people
Mhm.
actually want to have
Yep.
one to wade through. I don't know about the, what was the second one? Long range plan. Oh, the transportation improvement program, the TIP. Is that, do we have that laying around? I mean, is that an actual?
I can send you a link. It's actually on the SEMCOG website.
Okay, okay.
That one-
And actually Watts may have a version of that on their website.
Yeah, that one's definitely a living document. It's getting
Okay.
modified.
Yes.
So every quarter, it's getting, much like our budgeting process, there's amendments that get done.
Mhm.
Whether they be full amendments where they need approval from various boards, or they could be administrative changes
Mm.
that gets done by staff, but they are amended frequently. And when we go to bid a project, right before we go to bid, it gets programmed. So it goes from the planning phase to the construction phase, and that's where a lot of administration changes may occur. And that's where the support of Washington Area Transportation Study and SEMCOG, they help us through that process. It's a very, very good partnership. And they're the ones that are publishing these documents, the long range plan and the TIP, Transportation Improvement Plan. Those are published by ultimately SEMCOG.
Commissioner Green. Oh,
I was
sorry,
just gonna
Matt.
mention, so we're gonna shortly be talking about second quarter budget. So this ties into nicely with that. So when we're looking through that second quarter budget and we're looking through our project list, hopefully this helps put the puzzle pieces together as well. So
Good
great
timing.
job, gentlemen.
Commissioner Green.
Great presentation, Brent, Aaron, and Dan.
Mhm.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
Great
you.
Presentation.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Matt?
That's all we had to share today.
Okay. At this point in time, it's pushing 11 o'clock. I think we're wrapped up here with the working session. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Support.
Aaron, if you would, please.
Commissioner Joanne McCollum.
Yes.
Commissioner Rod Green
Yes.
and Commissioner Burt Fuller.
Yes, we are adjourned. We will reconvene at 1 o'clock for our regular board meeting. Thank you, everybody.